If you agree that respect should never depend on a uniform, a paycheck, or what someone looks like today, then like and subscribe. Because this story proves that the people we dismiss too easily are often the ones who carried the heaviest weight. It began on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day no one remembers except for the ones who are forced to live inside it. Jessie Alvarez parked her dented delivery van outside a sleek glass building in downtown Raleigh, another stop on her never-ending route. She was 28, hair tied back in a rough ponytail, navy blue polo shirt clinging with summer sweat, and a stack of packages in her arms. To the people watching through the revolving doors, she looked like every other delivery worker. Another tired face behind a logo, another body hauling boxes through lobbies that never learned her name. And maybe that was the point. Because when you wear that uniform, nobody asks what came before. Nobody cares if you once bled in the sand or froze in the mountains. To them, you were just a delivery girl. Jessie was used to it. She had built an entire second life around invisibility, around the ease of being overlooked. The world knew her now as the woman with steel-toed shoes and a hand scanner, not as Sergeant Alvarez of the United States Marine Corps. They didn't see the scars hidden under long sleeves. They didn't see the silence she carried like a weapon, forged in firestorms where radios failed and the only communication was trust. They didn't see the tattoo curling along her left forearm, the wings of a storm cloud pierced by lightning, the mark of a unit no one dared speak about publicly, the Storm Riders. Inside the lobby, she approached the front desk with her usual quietness, packages stacked so high they blocked her face. The security guards barely looked up. One of them, a younger man with a buzz cut too sharp to hide his arrogance, smirked as he signed her delivery sheet. "You must love carrying other people's weight," he muttered, loud enough for his friends to chuckle. Jessie didn't reply. She shifted the boxes in her arms and turned toward the service elevator. That silence, the one she had learned overseas, was heavier than anything they could throw at her. But silence never stopped Mockery. Another guard leaned back in his chair, catching a glimpse of the tattoo when Jessie's sleeve slipped slightly as she reached for her scanner. His eyebrows rose. "Storm Rider," he said, pretending to read it like graffiti on a bathroom wall. "Sounds like a biker gang, or maybe a video game clan. You joined that on Xbox or something?" Laughter rippled across the desk. One of them even mimicked revving a motorcycle. Jessie didn't flinch. She just adjusted the boxes and kept her eyes forward. But inside, the words scraped at something old, something she had buried deep. Storm Rider wasn't a game. It was a name whispered in briefing tents at 2 in the morning, a call sign that meant men and women were about to walk into shadows and pray they walked back out. It was the last thing she heard over comms before a mission that still woke her in the middle of the night. Still, here she was, just another delivery girl, laughed at for the mark she carried. She pressed the elevator button and waited, the laughter behind her swelling. Careless, thoughtless. She remembered how once silence was respect. On missions, no one joked, no one smirked, because lives hung in the balance. Now her silence was mistaken for weakness, her patience for emptiness. And yet, she endured it, because she had chosen this life after walking away from the other. She had chosen to disappear into the noise of traffic, delivery routes, and cardboard boxes. She had chosen to hide the medals tucked inside a shadow box in her closet, unopened since the day she left the Corps. She had chosen anonymity because anonymity was safe, and maybe because she was tired of explaining why a woman barely 30 carried eyes that had seen too much. But destiny has a way of cracking even the strongest walls of silence. And that Thursday, as the elevator doors creaked open and Jessie disappeared inside, someone else entered the lobby. A man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, chest-proud, the kind of walk that only comes from decades of discipline. He wore civilian clothes, but his bearing was unmistakable to anyone who had once stood in formation. A Marine. His eyes caught the flash of ink on Jessie's forearm as the elevator doors slid shut, and for a heartbeat, the noise in the lobby evaporated. He froze. His jaw clenched. Because he knew that symbol. He knew it the way a drowning man knows air. The guards kept laughing, unaware, thinking they had found their entertainment for the afternoon. But the Marine's expression shifted from disbelief to something else entirely. A memory crashing into the present, a recognition that would silence the entire building before the day was over. And Jessie, oblivious to the storm about to break, simply rode the elevator up, clutching her packages, shoulders tight, pretending once again that the world would never know who she really was. The truth was simple. They had dismissed her as a delivery girl. But the Storm Rider mark wasn't something you bought, or invented, or played at. It was something earned in places no one in that lobby could even imagine. And before the sun set on that ordinary Thursday, everyone in that building would learn exactly what those words meant. Because sometimes the past refuses to stay hidden. Sometimes it steps through glass doors at the exact moment it needs to, and looks straight into the eyes of those who mock, daring them to keep laughing. And when that happens, the whole world stops pretending. This was just the beginning. Jessie Alvarez didn't seek recognition. She didn't want applause. But she carried a history too powerful to stay buried. And all it took was one Marine, one glance at that tattoo, to remind the world that respect isn't given. It's already there, waiting to be remembered. The elevator hummed upward with Jessie and her stack of packages, each floor a small escape from the voices that had mocked her downstairs. She exhaled slowly, pressing the corner of a cardboard box against her chest, forcing herself not to care. She told herself the same thing she always did: they don't know. They'll never know. But as the numbers ticked upward, her hand brushed against her sleeve, tugging it back over the faint outline of ink on her forearm. Storm Rider. She had thought she'd left it buried in another life, half a world away. She was wrong. Down in the lobby, the atmosphere had shifted without anyone realizing it yet. The Marine in civilian clothes stood frozen, his eyes still locked on the elevator doors that had swallowed Jessie. For the guards, the moment had already passed. They went back to scrolling phones, sipping coffee, spinning jokes between themselves. But not him. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if steadying himself against a wave of memory. The Storm Rider insignia was not something you accidentally inked onto your skin. It was not a logo you borrowed. It was a mark carried by less than 24 men and women who had once stepped into missions so dark that even the Corps spoke of them only in whispers. The man moved toward the desk, and the guards barely noticed. When he spoke, his voice carried authority without volume. "Who was that?" he asked. One guard snorted. "Who? The delivery girl? Just some driver with a biker tattoo." The Marine's eyes hardened. That wasn't a biker tattoo. His tone cut through the air like a blade, sharp enough to still the laughter. For the first time, the guards exchanged uncertain glances. Upstairs, Jessie dropped the packages on an office counter, signed her sheet, and turned back toward the elevator. Her route didn't allow for lingering, and she never lingered anyway. But as she rode the elevator back down, she felt the tension in her chest, the familiar weight of being seen, not as invisible, but as something she had worked so hard to hide. The door slid open again, and there he was. The Marine. He stood just feet away, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper hair cropped close, the kind of posture you never lose after years of command. His eyes locked on hers, and for the first time all day, Jessie felt her body falter. She knew that look. Recognition. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, and the room seemed to shrink around them. The guards leaned back in their chairs, smirks fading as something unexplainable passed between the two strangers. "Where did you get that?" the Marine asked quietly, his gaze flicking to her forearm. Jessie didn't answer at first. She could have lied. She had lied before. A friend designed it. It's just art. It doesn't mean anything. But something about his tone, about the absolute certainty in his eyes, stripped her of that shield. She swallowed once, lifted her chin, and said simply, "I earned it." The words dropped into the lobby like a stone into still water. Ripples of silence spread outward, swallowing every trace of laughter. The Marine's jaw tightened. He straightened, his right hand rising in a sharp, deliberate salute. Precise, flawless, unmistakable. A gesture that said more than 1,000 explanations ever could. Jessie froze. The world around her blurred, but the salute pierced through. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she set down her scanner, her packages, and returned it. Not the quick, casual gesture of a delivery worker appeasing some stranger, but the crisp, practiced motion of a Marine who had once lived by it. Her hand rose, sharp and steady, muscle memory dragging her back into a life she had buried. Gasps echoed behind the desk. One guard muttered under his breath, "Wait, what?" Another's face drained of color. The Marine lowered his hand, his voice steady but heavy with something only he understood. "Sergeant Alvarez. Storm Rider 3. I never thought I'd see you again." Jessie's breath caught. The name, her old name, hung in the air like a secret torn open. For the first time, the guards realized they weren't staring at a delivery girl with an inked arm. They were staring at a woman who had carried a title none of them could even imagine, a woman whose silence wasn't emptiness but history. One guard fumbled, whispering, "Storm Rider, that's real?" The Marine's eyes never left Jessie's. "Real enough to bury its ghosts in every corner of the world," he said quietly. "Real enough that if you're still standing here, we all owe you more than laughter." Jessie didn't bask in the revelation. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand an apology. She just picked up her packages again, her face calm, though her eyes carried storms no one in that lobby would ever survive. Because she hadn't come for recognition. She had come to do her job. But the moment had already shifted. The guards who had mocked her sat frozen in their chairs, unable to look her in the eye. The Marine stood at her side, not as a stranger anymore, but as a witness to who she had once been. And the truth was undeniable now. She had been dismissed as a delivery girl. But in one instant, with one tattoo and one recognition, everything had changed. This was no longer just Jessie Alvarez, the woman behind a delivery route. This was Sergeant Alvarez, Storm Rider 3, and the weight of that name was about to change the entire room. The lobby didn't feel like the same place anymore. A minute ago, it had been filled with careless jokes and shallow laughter. Now it was a chamber of silence, heavy with realization. The Marine lowered his salute, his gaze steady on Jessie, and the room seemed to breathe differently. For the guards behind the desk, the air grew thick with something they couldn't name but couldn't escape: shame. Jessie adjusted the packages in her arms, steadying herself. She hadn't asked for this moment. She hadn't wanted it. For years, she had chosen obscurity, blending into the background of ordinary life. It was easier that way. Safer. No questions. No eyes searching for the weight behind her silence. But in the space of a single heartbeat, her past had walked back into the present, and the shadows she had tried so hard to leave behind had stepped into the light. The Marine spoke again, his voice carrying the kind of weight that didn't need to rise above a whisper. "They called us ghosts. But you, Storm Rider 3, you carried the storm itself. I never forgot." Jessie's eyes flickered. Memories clawed their way back, dust choking her lungs in Kabul, rain turning jungle soil into rivers in the Philippines, nights where the only sound was her own pulse and the quiet promise of comrades who had trusted her with their lives. She shifted slightly, her voice low. "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came to do my job." The Marine nodded slowly. "That's what makes you unforgettable." The guards, who had mocked her only minutes before, now sat stiff, their laughter turned brittle, their eyes fixed anywhere but on Jessie. One finally broke the silence. "Wait, you're telling me she—" His words faltered when the Marine's gaze snapped to him. "Steel and ice in equal measure." "You don't lock that tattoo," the Marine said flatly. "Not unless you've earned the right to wear one." He turned back to Jessie, softer now. "Storm Rider wasn't a name we gave ourselves. It was a name whispered about us. Admit you walked into fire so others didn't have to." The guard's expressions shifted, from confusion to disbelief, and finally to the dull ache of realization. They had laughed at a woman whose silence had been carved in places they would never understand. They had mocked scars they couldn't even see. And now they sat small in their chairs, realizing the magnitude of what they had done. Jessie didn't stay to savor the silence. That wasn't who she was. She set her scanner back into her holster, nodded once at the Marine, and turned toward the doors. The weight in her steps wasn't heaviness. It was steadiness, the kind that comes from walking through storms and surviving. But before she reached the exit, the Marine's voice carried once more across the lobby. "Sergeant Alvarez," he said firmly. Jessie paused, half-turned, the packages still balanced in her arms. He didn't salute again. Instead, he said 5 words, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the air. "They'll remember you now." Her eyes held his for a heartbeat, then softened. "That's never why I wore it," she replied. And with that, she pushed through the glass doors, the city's noise rushing in to swallow her silhouette. The lobby remained still, the sound of her departure echoing longer than her presence had. One guard finally muttered, almost to himself, "Storm Rider." as though speaking the name might summon the storm itself. But the Marine knew better. He stood tall, watching the doors swing shut. "She is the storm," he whispered. Outside, Jessie walked back to her dented delivery van, her route waiting. She placed the boxes gently in the back, slid into the driver's seat, and rested her hands on the wheel. For a moment, she let the silence settle around her, heavy but calm. Then she started the engine, merged into traffic, and disappeared into the city. She hadn't asked for respect. She hadn't demanded apologies. She had carried herself the same way she always had. Steady, quiet, unbroken. And that was enough. Because sometimes the loudest stories aren't told in headlines or history books. Sometimes they walk into a lobby wearing a delivery uniform, carrying boxes no one thinks twice about, until a single mark on their arm reminds the world that legends don't fade. They just choose when to be seen. So the lesson lingered long after Jessie Alvarez was gone. Never dismiss someone by the uniform they wear today, because you may not survive what they carried yesterday. And in a glass lobby in downtown Raleigh, respect, silent, overdue, undeniable, finally stood where laughter had once been.